They weren't scared when you first went silent. In fact, your silence almost amused them. They had seen this before. You would leave after another argument. You would stop replying. You would disappear for a few days. But eventually, you always came back. The cycle always restarted. So when you became quiet this time, they weren't worried. They were waiting. Waiting for your loneliness to win. Waiting for your guilt to convince you that maybe you overreacted. Waiting for the trauma bond to pull you back into their world. Because every time you returned before, it confirmed one thing. They didn't have to change. You would do the work for both of you. But something was different this time. You didn't send that message. You didn't explain yourself. You didn't beg for closure. You didn't chase another conversation that would only end in confusion. You simply stayed silent. At first, they told themselves you just needed more time. Then they started checking. Maybe they viewed your profile. Maybe they expected a call. Maybe they waited for a birthday, a holiday, or some random excuse that would reopen the door. But nothing happened. Every day your silence continued, another piece of their certainty disappeared. Because they weren't used to losing access to you. They were used to having a reset button. They believed they could always return whenever they wanted because you had always been emotionally available. Your silence removed that certainty. And uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable for people who rely on control. What embarrassed them in the beginning slowly became something much heavier. Panic. Not necessarily because they missed you, but because they realized they might not have control anymore. They couldn't predict your next move. They couldn't pull you back into the familiar cycle. They couldn't use the same words that had always worked before. For the first time, they had to face something they never expected. The possibility that they had actually lost you. This is why silence is so powerful, not because it punishes someone, but because it protects you. Silence gives your nervous system the space it never had. It breaks the addiction to chaos. It allows your brain to stop waiting for the next emotional high and the next emotional crash. Healing begins where constant explanations end. Many survivors think they need one last conversation, one last apology, one last chance to be understood. But real freedom often begins the moment you stop trying to convince someone who never wanted to understand you. Your silence is not weakness. It is evidence that you finally chose peace over the need to be chosen. And that's the part they never prepared for. They prepared for your anger. They prepared for your tears. They even prepared for your forgiveness. But they never prepared for your indifference. Because once your silence becomes permanent, the old cycle has nowhere to restart. And that is when they finally understand. The person they thought would always come back has already moved on.